and the occasional skeletal deer carcass by the roadside. She drove with the windows up, more out of instinct than discomfort. It was early October, cool and dry, but the thought of the outside air touching her skin made her stomach curl when she finally turned onto Larkspur Lane and saw the house appear through the trees. Her breath hitched. It looked just as she remembered. Angular and hunched, its clapboard siding faded to the color of old ash, the roof patchy with slate shingles and black moss. 4 stories high, but somehow it always felt taller. The attic window, the one she remembered most, was like a lidless eye, circular and off-center, nestled above a gabled peak. It had been closed when she was a child. Today it was open just enough to be unsettling. She stared at it too long, her stomach grumbled from nerves or hunger. She couldn't tell the difference anymore. The house had belonged to her grandmother, Clara Marin, a woman whose face Miriam could barely conjure beyond a pair of cold, vigilant eyes and the scent of old lavender. Clara had died alone, apparently. A neighbor had found her body 2 weeks after the fact, sitting upright in the parlor chair with a knitted shawl still around her shoulders, her eyes open, skin like cracked wax. The obituary had been short. Miriam's mother had not attended the burial. Miriam herself had been in the hospital, sedated after what her therapist later called a psychological rupture. Now here she was, inheritor of the Marin estate, a Victorian pile that no one in their right mind would want, least of all someone recovering from a nervous collapse. But Miriam wasn't in her right mind, and maybe that was the point. As she stepped out of the car, dry leaves scuttled across the gravel like tiny paper claws. The house creaked once, a sound more felt than heard, and she turned her head sharply toward the attic window. Still open, still watching. It didn't close when the breeze passed through it. She walked up the porch steps and stopped in front of the door. The key slid into the lock too easily. When the door swung open, the smell hit her. Stale wood, mildew, something sweeter and riper beneath it all, like rotting fruit. The house hadn't been touched since the funeral, perhaps not for years before that. Inside, the light was thick and brown, leaking in through dusty curtains. Sheets covered the furniture, heavy with dust and strange outlines beneath. Miriam didn't uncover anything yet. She needed a moment to exist in the space, to adjust. She let her bag fall by the door and wandered through the front parlor, into the hallway, up the central staircase where shadows seemed to gather and cluster, as if reluctant to leave even under her gaze. On the second-floor landing, she paused. A cold draft touched the side of her neck. She looked up. The narrow stairwell to the attic was sealed with a trap door, painted the same color as the ceiling, but unmistakably there. A chain hung from its center, rusted and unmoving. For reasons she couldn't name, Miriam whispered aloud. "It's still up there." The words escaped before she could stop them. The air caught her voice, dragged it upward, then left silence in its place. She stared a second longer at the attic entrance, then continued upstairs to the guest room where she planned to sleep. She didn't dare choose the master bedroom. Not yet. That night, after a cursory dinner of saltine crackers and wine from a bottle she found in the cellar, it tasted like vinegar. She curled up on the guest bed and stared at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. The walls clicked and settled. Somewhere in the pipes, something shuddered. At around 2:15 a.m., she heard it. A whisper, very soft, like breath brushing fabric. She sat up immediately, the covers sliding off her legs. The sound had come from the attic. Miriam stood, crossed to the hallway, and looked up the stairwell. The chain still hung motionless. No wind blew through the house, and yet she heard it again. A whisper so gentle she wasn't sure it wasn't her own breath. Then it stopped. She didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, the attic window was closed again. She hadn't touched it. Miriam began the process of making the house livable with mechanical precision, half to give herself purpose, half to avoid thinking about the whisper, or the dream that followed it. She cleared the pantry of spoiled goods, opened the living room curtains to let the gray autumn light spill in, and found herself oddly drawn to the old grandfather clock in the hall. It was broken, its pendulum frozen mid-swing. Still, she wound it out of habit and was surprised when it let out a long, slow chime. 1, 2, 3. Each note rang through the floorboards like a warning. By noon, she began cleaning out the upstairs hallway closet. Most of the contents were as she expected: coats, mothballed dresses, brittle umbrellas. But tucked into the very back was a shoebox bound with twine. She sat on the floor and opened it. Inside were black and white photographs, dozens of them, some so faded the faces looked like smudged candle wax. Most were of the house, its exterior, its attic window. One showed a girl standing at the window, or just behind it. The image was too grainy to see clearly, but Miriam felt something cold bloom in her stomach. The girl's head was turned slightly as though she were listening. Below the photos were handwritten letters, some from Clara to unknown correspondents. Some appeared to be journal entries. One read, "The voice calls again. It is patient, not cruel. I understand now it does not want harm. It wants attention. That is worse. What we ignore, it becomes." Another was dated July 2nd, 1956. It simply said, "I shut the window. It opened again. The voice is no longer content to stay." Miriam reread it 3 times. She hadn't remembered Clara being religious, but the writing in the margins referenced veil seekers, those behind the glass, and something called the whisper doctrine. She spent hours poring over the contents of the box. By evening, the sun had vanished into a dull, dirty horizon. Somewhere in the house, a door creaked open and didn't shut again. Miriam jumped. She left the shoebox in the closet and walked through the house, checking every door. Nothing was open. Everything remained exactly as she'd left it. And yet, back in the guest room, she paused again beneath the attic stairwell. This time the chain was swinging, just slightly. A soft metallic sway, and from above once more the whisper. But this time, it said her name. Context: a sealed attic, a mysterious whisper. Adversity. The house seems aware of her return. Resolution, implied. Miriam may have been invited back, not by the will, but by something else entirely. The next morning arrived sullen and heavy with fog. Miriam opened her eyes to the sound of the house breathing. Not a groan, not creaks or settling, but a deep, low rhythm, so soft that had it not matched her heartbeat in counterpoint, she might have ignored it. She lay still in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling above her. The attic was directly overhead. The whisper had said her name. That much she knew, and it had sounded patient. Not ghostly, not ghastly, but familiar, like someone who'd been waiting just long enough to lose their urgency. Miriam finally stirred, dressing in jeans and a thick cardigan, pulling her hair back to keep it from her face. She avoided looking at the attic stairwell on her way down. The chain was still swinging gently, though there was no draft. The kitchen looked worse in daylight. The wallpaper peeled at the corners like old skin, and the linoleum curled up around rust-colored spots that might have been water damage, or something else. She brewed coffee, more for the ritual than the taste. The only mug she could find was cracked, a tiny line running down the side like a healed wound. She stood at the sink, watching the backyard trees sway behind the thin lace curtains. Her reflection stared back at her from the window, faint and paler than she remembered. The attic window was visible from here. It was shut again. Later that day, while rummaging through the upstairs hall closet again, Miriam pulled the shoebox back out. Not because she wanted to, but because it hadn't left her mind all morning. The girl in the attic photo. She couldn't shake the image. It was the tilt of the girl's head. The exact same way Miriam tilted hers when listening closely. She examined the box more thoroughly this time. Beneath the faded photographs and brittle letters was a leather-bound journal. It hadn't been there yesterday. No dust, no discoloration. The pages inside were yellowed with time, but the ink remained sharp. Miriam opened to the first entry. The window speaks, only when I stop trying to hear it. A later passage read, "There is a difference between silence and absence. The house is never silent. It only pretends." Miriam turned another page and found a hand-drawn diagram of the attic floor plan. At the center, surrounded by notes and lines, was a small circle labeled listening room. She didn't remember such a room. The attic, in her memory, had always been sealed. Her mother had forbidden her from going up there as a child. She stared at the diagram for nearly 10 minutes. Then she noticed something else. Faint handwriting in the margins, likely added much later, read, "Don't open the window, unless it asks nicely." Miriam let the journal rest in her lap. Her heart beat too loudly now. A strange pressure had begun to build behind her eyes, like tears trying to form without emotion. She closed the book and placed it back in the box. As she turned to return it to the closet shelf, something caught her attention. One of the portraits in the hallway, an oil painting of her grandmother Clara, stern-eyed and unsmiling, was hanging crookedly. Miriam frowned. She hadn't touched it, and it had been straight. Yesterday, she was sure of it. She stepped forward, reached out, and gently straightened it. The whisper came instantly, right behind her ear. Closer. She gasped and spun around. No one was there. The hall was empty, quiet, but she could still feel the breath on her neck. By evening, the fog had thickened around the house. The backyard trees vanished behind it, their trunks swallowed in gray. The world seemed to end 10 feet from her porch. Miriam tried the landline again. Dead. She sat down with the leather journal, this time determined to read it cover to cover. The entries ranged from poetic to paranoid. Many spoke of the voice as if it were a member of the household, an invisible presence that moved through the rooms like smoke. The voice knows patience. It grew inside this house like mold, fed on secrets and silence. Mother heard it first. She thought it was the wind or a memory, but the voice doesn't sound like others, it sounds like you. Another entry, dated months before Clara's death, was written in increasingly jagged script. It asked to be let in. It asked through the window. It sounded like Miriam. Miriam dropped the book. The sound of her name in that journal, written long before she ever returned to the house, tightened something deep in her chest. Her hands trembled. She didn't remember her grandmother ever being kind. But this felt deliberate, as if Clara had known she would come back, as if the voice had waited. That night, she sat in the living room with all the lamps on, the fireplace lit even though the chimney stank of birds and ash. The wind outside had picked up, and the walls clicked in response like bones realigning. Asleep. At 2:14 a.m., just before the whispering had started the night before, Miriam stood in the hallway staring up at the attic door. The chain no longer swung. It was still. She climbed the stairs, each step loud in the silence. At the top, she stood beneath the trapdoor. Her breath shook. She reached up and touched the chain. Nothing happened, but the air around her turned cold enough to bite. She pulled. The chain. The trapdoor creaked, then rose an inch, but didn't open fully. Something resisted, like the attic itself had lungs and was holding its breath. Then from the other side of the door, a soft knock. 1, 2, 3. Followed by the voice, again softer than before, as if through a thick wall of cotton. "Come now, just a little closer." Miriam slammed the door shut and backed away, heart pounding so violently she thought she might faint. She stumbled down the stairs and locked herself in the guest room, pushing a dresser in front of the door. That night, the voice didn't come again. But the next morning when she woke, the dresser had been moved back to its original place, and on her pillow was a photograph, one she hadn't seen before. It was a picture of her, standing in the upstairs hallway beneath the attic door. She had never taken it. Miriam fled the house that afternoon. She drove into the nearby town, more a collection of tired storefronts and gas stations than a true community, and found a diner with working lights and the smell of something fried. The waitress, a hunched woman with sharp eyes, recognized the address when Miriam mentioned it. "Old Marin Place?" the woman asked, pouring coffee into a chipped mug. "Ain't nobody lived there full-time since the 60s, except for the old lady. kept to herself. Miriam nodded. My grandmother. The woman's mouth twisted. She was strange. Used to sit on the bench outside town hall and mutter to herself. People said she was talking to her dead daughter, or her husband, or God. She didn't believe in God, Miriam murmured. That's what made it so strange, the woman replied. Miriam hesitated, then asked, Did you ever hear stories about the house? The waitress looked around. The diner was mostly empty. She leaned in slightly. Used to be, they said the house listened to folks. Not haunted. Not exactly. Just paying attention. Some kids swore they saw lights in the attic window. Even when nobody was home. Said they heard things. Like their own voice calling back to them. Miriam's blood ran cold. The woman leaned back again. Of course, that's just old talk. Places like that got long memories but no real teeth. Not unless you give them a reason. What kind of reason? The woman shrugged. Loneliness. Secrets. Weakness. That's what they feed on. And they don't forget faces. Miriam returned to the house at dusk. The fog had lifted, but everything was soaked with an unnatural stillness. As she parked and stepped out, she saw the attic window was open again. Only this time, something moved. Behind it, not a figure, not a shadow, just movement. She stood in the driveway far too long, staring up. The voice didn't come, but as she approached the house, she found the front door unlocked, even though she'd bolted it before she left. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. Her steps echoed more than before. The lights flickered when she turned them on. And then she noticed every picture in the hallway had been turned to face the wall, including her grandmother's portrait. She turned the painting back around. Behind it, scratched into the plaster, were words etched by a trembling hand. Closer. I miss your voice. Miriam's throat went dry. She backed away, nearly tripping over the shoebox which had somehow moved to the center of the hall. The attic door above her creaked. Dust rained down. A single note sounded from the grandfather clock, though it wasn't. The hour. Miriam didn't sleep that night. She sat in the hallway, staring up at the attic door, waiting for the whisper. But it never came. It had grown tired of waiting. It wanted her to speak first. Miriam discovers a journal revealing the attic's sinister reputation. Adversity. The whispers are getting bolder, echoing her name, asking for attention. Resolution. Implied. If Miriam listens long enough, she might answer. Miriam stopped counting the days after the 5th. The clocks in the house didn't keep proper time anyway. Some ran too fast, some too slow, and the grandfather clock chimed at random hours, as though trying to warn her in a language long forgotten. She kept the lights on at night, all of them. But the shadows didn't mind. They gathered in corners, coiled beneath furniture, watched from beneath door frames. Even with every bulb burning, the house never felt illuminated. It was as though the light itself was being swallowed by the walls. The whispering no longer came at set times. It slithered into her ears when she washed dishes, folded blankets, or stared out the window. Always faint, always knowing. It said her name with aching familiarity, with a hunger she couldn't define. Miriam. Some nights it sounded like her mother. Other times it was her voice. Not as she spoke now, but as she sounded when she was 10, lost and small, trapped in her own skin. It was during the 3rd night of rain that Miriam found the hatch to the attic fully unlatched. The trapdoor gaped open just enough to reveal the first few wooden rungs of the folding ladder, which hadn't been visible before. She stood beneath it for what felt like hours, heart rattling in her ribs. The whisper didn't come. Instead, something more terrible happened. Silence. True silence. Not the stillness of an empty house, but the complete absence of all sound. No pipes groaning, no wind, no hum of power. Even her own breathing became muffled, as if wrapped in wool. She reached up and touched the base of the ladder. Immediately, the silence ended, and the whisper flooded in. Louder now, echoing in her bones. You remember the summer? So do I. Her hand jerked away. The attic door slammed shut with a bang that shook dust from the rafters. She called her therapist again that morning. Still no answer. The cell signal flickered in and out. When it worked, the audio was garbled, voices warped. Her own reflection in the phone's black screen seemed to move a half-second out of sync. Eventually, she stopped trying. She took long walks in the woods trying to feel distance between herself and the house. But the trees pressed close like witnesses, and even when she ventured miles out, she always ended up facing the house again, as if it had moved to meet her. Miriam began writing in a notebook she found in the parlor desk. She didn't remember retrieving it, but there it was, open to the first blank page, pen beside it. At first she scribbled mundane things, grocery lists, journal entries, half-formed poetry. Then the writing changed. Her handwriting became smaller, more rigid. She wrote down phrases without meaning to. It speaks in echoes because it was born of silence. The attic isn't a room, it's a mouth. Do not answer when it calls, not even in thought. She tore the pages out, but the next morning, the same lines had returned. Ink identical to her own. Page numbers matched. It was as if the notebook had a memory of its own. One afternoon, while dusting the library, Miriam found a locked drawer in the bottom of the bookshelf. The key was jammed in place, rusted. She yanked it open with effort. Inside was a reel-to-reel tape recorder and several labeled spools. The labels were faded, but the dates were legible, ranging from 1953 to 1979. She didn't know what compelled her, but she threaded the tape. The machine groaned to life with a low hum. The recording hissed for nearly a minute. Then a voice, Clara's, cracked. Through July 3rd, the voice came again last night. It doesn't ask anymore, it assumes. A pause, faint breathing. I tried playing music to drown it out, but it simply sang along. The same tune a second behind, like it was learning. Static crackled, then a different sound. Soft, slippered footsteps on wooden floorboards. A child humming. Then, very faintly, Miriam? Miriam. Stop the tape. Her hands were shaking too hard, she replayed it. Same humming, same name. But when she reversed the tape and played it backward, the voice still said her name. Clearer now, like it was being unsaid and yet understood. That night, she placed the recorder in the hallway and left it running. The next morning, she played the tape back. Most of it was empty. Then, at 3:06 a.m., footsteps. Heavy. Measured. The recorder picked up the soft opening of the attic door. Then the same voice, louder now. She hears us. We are nearly remembered. The attic began to change. Not visibly, not to the eye. But Miriam could feel its shape pressing outward, like something vast was curled behind the ceiling and had begun to stretch. Sometimes, as she passed beneath the stairwell, she saw light bleeding through the cracks in the door, faint and flickering, a light too soft to be electrical, more like moonlight underwater. She stopped sleeping. Whenever she tried, she'd wake to find her body in strange places, on the hallway floor, in the bathroom, even standing silently before the attic door, head tilted upward. Once, she woke in the attic itself, or what should have been the attic. The room was black and windowless, with walls that breathed. Her grandmother's rocking chair stood in the center, rocking slowly, though there was no wind. Something sat in it. Miriam never remembered getting back to bed. But when she opened her eyes, her pillow was covered in attic dust and her feet were filthy with soot. She began to find things in her pockets, old buttons, dried lavender, a shard of glass with a child's fingerprint on it. Once an old key wrapped in red thread. She didn't remember picking any of it up. The shoebox moved rooms on its own. Some mornings she'd find it beside her bed. Other times, on the windowsill, facing the attic. Inside it now was a photograph of her mother as a child, standing at the attic window, mouth open in mid-sentence. The photo was warm to the touch. The back read, "She answered." Miriam wept that night. not out of fear, but because she realized she could no longer tell which memories were hers and which belonged to the house. One rainless afternoon, a leak began dripping in the hallway. She followed the sound. It led her up the stairs. A small puddle had gathered beneath the attic trapdoor, but the ceiling was dry. When she touched the water, it was warm. It smelled like tears. The attic door creaked, opened slightly as she stood beneath it. Not enough to climb in, just enough to breathe. And from the dark, "Tell me a secret, and I will show you mine," Miriam whispered back before she could stop herself. "I didn't cry when my mother died." The attic door opened another inch. The dreams worsened. She saw herself walking the halls in reverse, talking to no one, listening to whispers behind mirrors, pulling back her own face like a mask and revealing her grandmother's eyes underneath. The attic always loomed in the dream, impossibly tall. No matter how many stairs she climbed, it was always further above. Sometimes she woke screaming, other times laughing, and once, not asleep, she saw herself walk past the end of the hallway. Not her reflection, not a shadow, herself, moving quietly, head bowed, as if giving her space. The two Miriams never acknowledged each other, but afterward, the house felt smaller, as if it had one too many residents. She began speaking aloud during the day, half to herself, half to the house. Sometimes the house answered. Objects shifted slightly when she asked. The grandfather clock rang when she demanded silence. Her coffee mug rotated to face her after she mentioned feeling watched. The attic whisper didn't need to plead anymore. It waited, patient, kind, like a friend biding its time. The trapdoor was fully open now, always. Miriam hadn't gone up yet, but the stairs had extended themselves without her pulling them down, each step perfectly dustless. And in the dark above, the faint smell of lavender and static. One evening, she opened every window in the house except the attic. She wanted to force fresh air through the walls, wanted to let something else in. She stood at the base of the attic stairwell and shouted, "You can't keep me here." The house creaked once in response, then the lights went out. Complete darkness. Not even moonlight filtered through. She heard the stairs groan behind her, not the ones in front. Behind. Slow, deliberate footsteps climbing down from the attic, though she hadn't gone up. She ran into the parlor and locked the door behind her, then she waited. The footsteps stopped. On the other side of the door, a whisper. "You were born for this room." Later that night, while combing through a final set of old letters, Miriam found one sealed in wax. She opened it slowly. Inside was a single page written in a hand not her grandmother's, but one that mimicked her own. "To the one who returns, when the voice has grown cold, you will think you chose this house. You didn't. It chose you the moment you were left here as a child. You heard it then, and it heard you. It is not haunted. It is not cursed. It is waiting, and it is always hungry. Do not try to leave. You already did. And still, you came back. The attic remembers what you forgot. So will you." Miriam folded the letter and set it in the shoebox with trembling fingers. Then she rose and looked toward the attic, and for the first time she whispered something back. "I'm ready to remember." Miriam's grasp on time, memory, and self weakens as the attic grows bolder. Adversity. The voice now infiltrates her thoughts, reshapes her dreams, and answers when spoken to. Resolution. Implied. She's crossed a threshold. Listening is no longer a choice. The attic no longer whispered, it conversed. Not in words, at least not always, but in pulses of memory, emotion, sensation. It was like living inside a question you were never supposed to answer. The silence of the house was now an active presence, pushing and pulling at Miriam's thoughts, loosening her grip on what she knew about herself. She began keeping mirrors, covered. Her reflection had started to change, subtly at first, her mouth not moving with her words, her face turning a fraction too slowly, but then more drastically. In one moment of cold clarity, she watched herself in the hallway mirror. While brushing her hair, the reflection used the wrong hand. It smiled when she didn't. She threw a blanket over the glass and didn't look again for 2 days. She had not heard from anyone in over a week. The outside world was a concept she could describe but no longer feel. The phone remained dead. Her cell powered on, but no signal ever came. She could still open old texts, conversations with friends, appointments, missed calls. But they felt like artifacts now, relics from a past life she had slipped out of like an old coat. Worse, the voice had stopped mimicking others. It only used hers now. When it whispered from the attic, it was in her exact cadence, her breath, her pitch. If she spoke aloud, she could hear the faint echo respond, sometimes slightly ahead of her, like it had anticipated her words before she formed them. It didn't feel like being haunted. It felt like being remembered too well by something she had tried to forget. In her dreams, her mother appeared often. But it was not the woman Miriam had known in life, sharp-tongued and cold, distant as a planet. This version was younger, softer, dressed in clothes from Miriam's earliest memories. She sat in the attic rocking chair, stroking a child's braid. "You left us," Dream Mother would say without malice. But the house didn't. Miriam wanted to ask who us meant, but each time she woke with the words thick in her, mouth and tears crusted around her eyes. Sometimes her mother's voice called down the attic stairs in broad daylight. Other times she spoke from behind closed doors, her voice growing more distorted the longer Miriam listened. One afternoon, she stood outside the guest room, listening to her mother hum a lullaby she hadn't heard in decades. It ended in a sudden, quiet laugh. Miriam didn't open the door, she just said, "You're not her." The laughter stopped. Then came the whisper, "But you are." She found herself drawn to old corners of the house, forgotten spaces, behind the water heater, beneath the cellar, stairs. She discovered a crawl space behind the second-floor linen closet, something she didn't remember from childhood. Inside were 3 objects: a child's wooden spoon, a lock of hair tied with red string, and a small music box. She wound the music box once. It played 5 notes, then clicked violently and refused to move again. That night she dreamed of herself standing in that same crawl space, only it was much larger, vaulted, cathedral-like. The walls pulsed like lungs. Rows of rocking chairs lined the perimeter, each one occupied by a version of her, sitting silently, waiting to be remembered. The attic light flickered on far above. And in it, the real Miriam, or the closest to real, stood paralyzed. Each version of her below whispered, "Let us in." She kept the journal close now. Not Clara's, but her own. Only it didn't feel like hers anymore. She flipped through recent entries and found pages she didn't remember writing. Some were diagrams of floor plans that didn't exist, of rooms that shouldn't fit inside the house. Others were long, cyclical sentences repeated over and over again. "I am not alone in my body. Memory can be infected. If it sounds like you, it already knows how to be you." One page simply read, "How long until I'm the whisper?" Her appetite faded, replaced by a gnawing in her stomach that had nothing to do with hunger. The house offered no comfort. Even the sunlight seemed unnatural, filtering in as if borrowed from another place. On some mornings she woke to find every lamp turned on, though she distinctly remembered switching them off. Other mornings, all the curtains had been drawn, back and the attic window wide open, letting in air that didn't move and light that didn't warm. She began writing letters she never intended to send. Letters to people who wouldn't remember her. To her father, long gone. To the version of her mother who never came back from the hospital. To the child she never had. Each letter ended the same. "I can still hear myself." But only barely. Then came the day she found the second Miriam. She'd been walking the upstairs hallway, following the sound of dripping water again. But instead of puddles or leaks, she found footprints, bare, dusty, matching her own size and stride. She followed them to the attic stairs, but they didn't go up. They led into the guest room. Inside, everything looked untouched, except the bed. Its pillow was indented, still warm, and the mirror above the dresser had been wiped clean. She approached it cautiously, pulse thundering in her ears. Her reflection waited. This time, it didn't mimic her. It raised its hand before she did. It smiled too wide. Then it whispered, lips barely moving. "You are almost me." Miriam screamed and smashed the mirror. The pieces fell silently. Each shard held her face. Each one whispered something different. None of them blinked. After, that time no longer passed in days. She stopped checking calendars. The sun rose and fell at irregular intervals. Meals were forgotten. Hours vanished. Sometimes she sat in one spot for what felt like seconds, only to look up and realize the day had shifted. She began marking the walls. Small symbols, tally marks, words in chalk, but they disappeared overnight, or reappeared in different configurations. Once they were rewritten in a hand she didn't recognize, spelling out, "You're learning to forget yourself." She returned to Clara's journal, searching for clues, answers. Instead, she found sympathy. An entry near the end read, "It doesn't need to possess you. It only needs you to forget where it ends and you begin. The attic is the mind that never sleeps. You are just the next thought it will dream." Below it was a sketch of two women standing side by side. One had a stitched mouth, the other had no eyes. Their bodies shared the same spine. The attic stairs now remained extended at all times. No matter how many times she pushed them up, they would be down again the next day. Dust no longer gathered on the steps. The attic air seeped through the house like perfume, smelling faintly of old pages, copper, and lilacs rotting in the sun. Miriam began dreaming in voices, not just hers, not just her mother's, but Clara's, a child's, one that sounded like something imitating her, then slowly growing more confident, more fluent in the language of Miriam's pain. In one dream, she sat in the attic, staring at a wall that pulsed. With veins, the voices repeated a phrase over and over. "To become it, you must remember when you were already." When she woke, her hands were covered in dust, her fingernails packed with insulation. She never left the bed. Then, finally, clarity arrived. It did not come in the form of fear, but surrender. She stood in the hallway beneath the attic stairwell and did not flinch when the light flickered on above. She did not look away when the door creaked open. She whispered, "What are you?" The voice replied, "The first thing you forgot, the last thing you'll remember." Miriam climbed the stairs, not in terror, but with the calm of someone returning home. As her hand reached the top rung, a memory surfaced, not of her own childhood, but of the summer she was left here, of being told never to go upstairs, of standing outside the attic door and hearing her grandmother crying on the other side. But her mother told her it was the wind. Now she remembered. The door had been open. She had gone in, and something had whispered then, "Come closer, Miriam. You're almost me." Now, on the edge of the attic, she knew the truth wasn't hiding behind the door. It had never been the attic itself. It was what the attic remembered of her, not a ghost, not a curse, but an impression, a blueprint. A copy drawn slowly over time, fed by grief, silence, and abandonment. Every moment she had felt unseen, unheard, unspoken. These were the bricks of the attic's mouth. Now it waited, silent and breathing. Miriam placed her foot on the attic floor. The air shifted, and the house whispered in her own voice with a note of joy so human it nearly broke her. "Welcome back." Miriam's identity fractures as her voice and reflection are mimicked. Adversity. The attic no longer needs to speak to her, it speaks as her. Resolution, implied. She is no longer resisting. She is remembering what she already became. The attic was silent for 3 full days. No whispers, no creaks, no flickering lights. Miriam woke on the first morning of quiet to sunlight that felt real. Soft golden beams through the parlor windows, warm on her hands. Outside, the trees stood still. No fog, No pressing sky, just crisp, cool air. For a while, she didn't move. She simply sat in the kitchen, wrapped in her grandmother's shawl, sipping warm water with lemon. The electricity returned without explanation. The fridge hummed again. The old radiator clicked in steady rhythms like a mechanical heartbeat. It felt like the house had exhaled, like something had finally passed. For the first time in weeks, Miriam looked at herself in the mirror and saw nothing strange. Her reflection moved when she did. It blinked in sync. She brushed her hair without dread, noticing the gray along her temples with a tired acceptance. Her eyes were still her own. And when she listened? Nothing. No breathing in the walls, no footsteps above, no voice at all. The second day she left the house. She drove into town without hesitation, guided not by panic or curiosity but simple routine. The car engine started on the first try. The trees along the road no longer leaned as if whispering secrets. Even the shadows beneath them felt ordinary. In town, the world moved on as if nothing had happened. Children crossed the street in jackets, 2 sizes too big. A teenager swept leaves from the diner steps. The gas station blinked open in blocky neon, and behind the fogged window of a laundromat, a man folded clothes like time still mattered. Miriam parked and walked into the same diner she'd visited before. This time the waitress didn't blink when she saw her. "Back again, huh?" she said, pouring her a mug of coffee without asking. "You look better." Miriam sat quietly. "I feel better." The waitress nodded. "It's good when houses get quiet. Means you've made peace with something." Miriam stiffened slightly. "What do you mean?" The woman shrugged. "You came back to that house for a reason. That kind of silence doesn't just happen. It's earned. Most folks don't make it that far." I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe you were. Sometimes that's the only way to make room for what comes next. Miriam blinked. "What comes next?" The woman smiled. "Rest. Memory. And then the real choosing begins." She topped off the coffee and walked away. Miriam sat with those words for a long time. That night back at the house, the attic remained silent. She passed the stairwell without looking up. The ladder was folded, the door flush with the ceiling. For the first time in weeks, it looked like any other part of the house. She went to sleep easily. Her dreams were filled with sunlight, warmth, and something else she hadn't expected. Laughter. She was young again, walking the garden behind the house, following her mother's voice. Her mother was humming, not the lullaby from before, but a different tune. Lighter, hopeful, the kind of song one hums while planting seeds, and Miriam, in her dream, asked, "Will they grow?" Her mother knelt in the dirt, pressing her fingers into the soil. "Everything grows," she said. "Even what you bury." Miriam awoke smiling. The sun touched her face again, soft and pale. No weight on her chest, no voices in her mind. She breathed deeply and felt something she hadn't in months: relief. On the third day, she explored the house without fear. She opened every drawer, every closet, every locked cabinet. She found her grandmother's old perfume still fragrant, a stash of handwritten recipes, a hidden photograph of her mother as a child seated at a piano, eyes luminous, nothing sinister, no tricks. Even the crawl space behind the linen closet was empty. The spoon and lock of hair were gone. The music box now lay quiet, its spring finally broken. The hallway no longer hummed. The paintings stayed where they hung. Her own reflection, in the dust-streaked glass of the grandfather clock, simply looked tired. The attic didn't call. Not once. It was tempting to believe that something had passed, that the haunting, if that's what it had been, had lifted, that she had been tested, broken, and was now on the other side. She even considered selling the house. Just a passing thought. But it surprised her how rational it felt. She began writing. Again, this time in a fresh notebook. No compulsions, no strange symbols, just real thoughts, clean sentences. She documented everything. The nightmares, the whispers, the hallucinations, or whatever they were. She wrote not to remember, but to reclaim. At the end of each entry, she added a simple phrase, "I am still me," and she believed it. On the fourth day, she ventured into the attic, not because she was called, not because she had to, but because the fear had become curiosity. The once forbidden space was now just another room in a house she had grown to understand, to tame. The ladder descended with a mechanical sigh. Dust floated through the beam of her flashlight. The attic was empty. No mirrors, no toys, no rocking chair, no pulsing walls, only a wide-open space beneath the slanted roof filled with quiet and the smell of dust and cedar. She walked slowly, half expecting the shadows to shift, the voice to return, but nothing did. In the far corner, where the moonlight pooled from the round attic window, sat a single object, a small box wrapped in faded black ribbon. It hadn't been there before. She approached it and crouched down. Inside were pages from her childhood journal, pages she hadn't seen since she was 10. She hadn't remembered bringing them here. The entries were frantic, childlike, confused. One read, "I don't like the mirror in the attic. It talks when I'm not looking." Another, "Grandma says not to tell Mommy about the girl with my face." Miriam's hands trembled slightly as she turned the pages. But there was no fear, just a cold recognition. At the bottom of the box was a drawing, a crude crayon sketch of a girl standing at the attic window, her mouth open in a scream. The child had no eyes. Miriam folded the pages back inside and set the box down. Then she stood, walked to the window and looked out. The forest was still. The house was silent, and she felt something she hadn't felt since she was a child. Clarity. That night, she lit every candle in the parlor and sat in silence. She drank tea, held the shawl around her shoulders, and reread the letters she'd found during her first week back. She even smiled once, at a line her grandmother had written decades ago. "Loneliness is the clearest voice. That's why it answers first." At midnight, she stood before the attic stairs again. The trapdoor was closed. The chain still. No voice. Just the thrum of her heart. She whispered, "I'm not afraid anymore." No reply came. She turned to walk away. Then, from deep within the walls came a sound. Not a whisper. A breath. Soft. Content. Like something had settled or gone to sleep. She should have left then. That would have been the story's end. The woman, who faced her haunted past, endured the unraveling of her mind, stood at the edge of madness and turned back whole. That would have been a relief, but the attic had taught her something else. Calm is not peace. Stillness is not safety. And silence is rarely silence, it is waiting. That night, as she lay in bed and drifted into sleep, a new sound emerged. From the pipes, from the floorboards, from inside the walls. Knocking. Gentle, rhythmic, like something was knocking from inside her. She opened her eyes. The attic ladder was down again, and something stood at the top, not watching, listening, for her to speak. What's the most disturbing part so far? The voice, the mirrors, or the moment Miriam started to feel safe? Tell us in the comments if you dare. The knocking continued each night, never loud, never frantic, always steady. 3 knocks, a pause, then 3 more. It came from different places each time. The floor beneath her bed, the hallway closet, the wall behind the kitchen sink. Sometimes it sounded like wood on wood. Other times it mimicked the soft thud of bone against plaster. Miriam stopped sleeping. She would lie awake for hours, hands over her ears, waiting for it to end. But the knocking didn't want her attention. It wanted her endurance. It wanted her to adapt, to normalize it, so she would listen without flinching. By the 4th night, she was doing just that, sitting in bed, eyes open, waiting for it, and when it came, she simply nodded once to herself. It had returned, not because she had failed, but because the calm was never meant to last. That morning, the attic ladder was down again, but this time, not extended. Stretched, it reached farther than it should, all the way to the floor without folding. Its wood had darkened, warped like something wet had soaked into the grain. The trapdoor above looked slightly wider, and the ceiling surrounding it was discolored, veined, with a yellowish tinge, like aged paper left in a damp drawer. Miriam touched the bottom step and flinched. It was warm, not from sunlight, from within. She did not climb. Not yet. She backed away, retreating down the stairs, eyes locked on the threshold above. But even as she left, she could feel the attic watching her. No longer calling, inviting. She tried to leave the house again that afternoon, not in panic, not in flight, just to test if she still could. She packed a bag, keys, wallet, her journal, a bottle of water. But when she turned the ignition in the car, nothing happened. No click, no whir, just the faint sound of breathing from the speakers. She stepped out, popped the hood, everything in place. Then she saw the driveway. It was gone. Where gravel should have been was now forest, dense and silent. Trees standing impossibly close, their bark too smooth, too black. The curve of the road she'd driven days ago no longer existed, just woods. She walked 20 feet into them, heart pounding. No birds, no insects, no breeze. The air felt like cotton in her lungs. She turned back and saw the house now closer than it had been before, as if it had leaned forward. She backed away slowly until she was on the porch again. The front door opened on its own. She didn't go in right away, but she no longer believed she could go anywhere else. Inside, she found the mirrors uncovered again. All of them. Guest room, hallway, bathroom. Even the shard she'd smashed was whole again, lying on the dresser in a neat circle like it had never shattered. Her reflection stared back at her, blank and expectant. She covered each one in silence, muttering words not to banish anything, but to delay it. Then she stopped in front of the mirror outside the attic stairwell. The cloth she lifted had writing on it, words in charcoal scrawled across the fabric. "Look, now, or you will never see again." She pulled it back. The mirror showed the attic, not the stairwell, not her reflection, but the attic. Flickering light, the rocking chair, a mirror inside the attic reflecting the hallway behind her. She looked away, then back. Now the reflection was her again, only smiling, mouth moving, but no sound. The tapes began to play on their own again. She walked into the library to find the recorder spinning. Clara's voice, warped, frantic, spilled into the air. "The attic is remembering faster than I can forget. It's too late. I should never have tried to keep it company." Static. Then a child's voice. "We're almost the same size now." She ejected the tape. The machine kept spinning. No tape inside. Still playing. She unplugged it. It kept spinning. So, she wrapped it in a blanket and locked it in the crawl space. From inside, it still hummed, still whispered. Over the next 2 days, the house rearranged itself. Not dramatically, just enough to unsettle. Chairs turned to face mirrors she'd covered. Family photographs showed different people, faces similar to hers but wrong. In one, a woman stood beside Clara, smiling, arms crossed. The woman had Miriam's eyes, but not her mouth. Each night, the knocking grew louder. Sometimes it came from beneath the bed, other times from inside the walls, and once from the pillow beside her. She didn't scream. She didn't run. She simply whispered back, "I'm not ready yet." The house sighed, as if disappointed, as if it knew she would be. Then came the scratching. The first time, she thought it was mice. The second time, she thought it was in her head. By the third night, she knew it wasn't either. The scratching came from the attic floor, but not from inside the attic, from underneath it, like something was moving between the floors of the house, not crawling, clawing. And when she stood beneath the attic trap door, the scratching stopped, as if it was listening, waiting, like it didn't want to be overheard. She opened the shoebox again on the 7th night. Inside were new items: a broken comb, a braid of hair tied with twine, a photo of herself sleeping. She was curled in the guest bed, face half hidden by the blanket, but the attic ladder was down in the background. The window behind her was open, and outside, at the edge of the photo, stood a figure, half in frame, wearing her face. She dropped the photo. It fluttered to the floor. The next morning it was gone, but the comb remained, still warm, still holding strands of her hair she hadn't lost. Yet. On the 8th night, the rocking chair returned in the attic. She hadn't placed it there, hadn't moved it at all, but there it was, restored, facing the window. It rocked gently, even though no breeze stirred, and in its seat, pressed into the cushion, was a deep indentation, not human-shaped, something smaller. Miriam stood at the base of the attic stairs, staring up. The voice didn't call. The rocking didn't stop. She whispered, "I know what you are." The chair stilled. Then, very softly, the voice responded, "Then you know what you've been." She didn't climb. Not yet. But she didn't leave either. She sat on the hallway floor for hours, listening, remembering, preparing. The final sign came the next morning. She woke to find the attic door gone. In its place was a smooth ceiling. No trapdoor, no chain, just plaster, seamless and perfect, as if the attic had never existed. But the stairs were still there, leading up to nothing, and above, just the faint hum of whispers without form. Not words, just breath, alive, close, welcoming. She stood beneath the empty ceiling, hand reaching toward where the door should be, and in her mind, not aloud, the voice said, "It's inside now, just like you." She smiled, not in fear, not in surrender, but in understanding. The ceiling remained smooth. For days, Miriam stood beneath it, waiting for the trapdoor to reappear, for the ladder to extend again. But the attic was no longer a destination above her. It had sunk into the house, seeped down into the beams and baseboards, woven itself into every breath of air. She could feel it when she touched the walls, soft warmth pulsing behind them. She could smell it in the dust, no longer the old tang of wood and mold, but something sharper, something living. It had changed her posture, the way she moved, even the way she breathed, short, shallow inhales like someone listening through her lungs. The attic had made itself a room inside her. Her journal no longer made sense. Some entries were written in handwriting that wasn't hers, slanted letters, looping strokes, a fondness for phrases she'd never used before. She's closer now. I can feel the floor giving. The more she forgets herself, the more she remembers me. I didn't steal her life. She left it open. Others read like scripts between two voices sharing one body. You wrote this. No, you did. I was asleep. You're still asleep. She tried to tear them out. But every time she opened the journal again, the pages had returned. Only now they bled at the edges, ink trailing downward like veins. She caught glimpses of herself in windows, not reflections, glimpses. A second Miriam in the pane across the room, watching with her head slightly tilted, always just out of focus, always gone when directly looked at. Once she caught her own eyes blinking in a mirror before she'd blinked. That night, she opened the linen closet and found it full of dresses. She didn't own old-fashioned things, high collars, hand-stitched seams. One still smelled of lavender. She stepped back, closed the door, and whispered, "That's not mine." From inside, her voice responded softly. It was. She stopped, eating, not because she was afraid, but because she didn't need to. Her body still moved, still functioned, but hunger never came. It was as if the house had replaced that part of her too, feeding her with memory, with breath, with the hum of whispers in her blood. One morning she found a cracked teacup on the windowsill. Inside it, a tiny tooth. Not a child's, hers. When she opened her mouth to check, nothing was missing. But when she smiled in the mirror, something in the reflection winced. A week passed, or an hour. Time was no longer trustworthy. She marked the days on the wall with a red pencil. Each night, they were scrubbed clean, rewritten with the words, "Not yet," and always the knocking, fainter now, less physical. No longer coming from beneath the floor, but from within her thoughts, tapping gently at the edges. One night, it knocked in rhythm with her heartbeat. She laid her hand on her chest. It paused, then knocked once, from inside her palm. She screamed, for the first time in days, and the attic whispered gently, almost lovingly, "Now you're awake." She returned to the photograph of her mother, now somehow hung above the mantel. The girl in the image, the one sitting at the piano, had changed. Her eyes were no longer her mother's, they were Miriam's. She checked the back of the photo. The caption had shifted. First recital, 1975, Miriam plays for Clara. Her hands trembled. She turned the photo again. The background had changed too. It wasn't a living room anymore. It was the attic. The next day, she opened the crawl space one last time. Inside was a child's shoe, still wet with dew, and the broken music box now playing its tune in reverse. She wound it once. It stopped, then played forward. A lullaby she didn't know, but her lips moved to it unconsciously. She knew every note. She knew the words. She whispered them to herself. "If I go up, I won't come down. But I was never on the ground. If I look out, I see my face. If I stay in, I find my place." She cried without sound, not from fear, but recognition. She had written that song, or someone who wore her voice had. That evening, the attic returned. Not the door, not the ladder, but the room. She stepped into the guest bedroom and stopped short. Where the wall should have been was a new hallway. Narrow, wooden, slanting upward at a slight angle. A hallway that should not have fit inside the house. The floorboards were wrong. Older, made of a darker wood, soft underfoot like something buried beneath them, moved slowly. She followed it. No hesitation. Each step forward made her smaller, younger, less certain of herself. By the time she reached the end, she was breathing like a child again. Quick, shallow, half-hiding. The room at the end was the attic. But not as she remembered. Or maybe it was exactly as she remembered. Walls covered in drawings, her own hand in crayon, charcoal, pencil. Faces with stitched mouths, eyes with nothing inside. Phrases repeated again and again. "You are her." She left her voice behind. Only those who forget can listen. In the center of the attic, the rocking chair waited, facing the round window. The light outside was neither day nor night, just gray. Figure sat in the chair. She circled around slowly, prepared. What she saw didn't make her scream, didn't make her cry. It made her nod. Because of course, the thing in the chair was her, not older, not younger, just slightly off. Its mouth moved as she approached. It said, "Now you remember how long you've been here." And behind her, the attic door closed without a sound. She doesn't know how long she sat. Could have been minutes. Could have been weeks. She talked with herself, or the part of herself the attic had grown in her absence. They spoke in half-thoughts, memories that didn't line up. About the summer she was left in the house. About the nights she stood beneath the attic stairs, wanting to knock but too afraid. About the version of her that did knock, the one that did climb. The one that stayed. "You answered," the thing said, rocking gently. And I grew in that echo. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you knew silence too well," it said. And now we finish remembering. The attic began to shrink around her, or she grew. It didn't matter. The space folded inward until everything, the window, the rocking chair, the whispers, compressed into her reflection on the wall, and when she touched it, She felt the breath of the house pass through her fingertips. The voice said, "You're almost home." She closed her eyes and stepped into herself. The moment Miriam stepped into herself, into the reflection, into the room, into the voice, the world did not shatter. It folded. A quiet undoing. Her thoughts did not scream. They unspooled, like thread, drawn through a tight hem. Every stitch pulling open parts of her she hadn't known were sealed. It felt like warmth, not comfort, but fever. Something building inside her, just shy of pain. The attic accepted her without sound. That was how she knew she'd been meant for it all along. She did not fall unconscious. The loss of self came piece by piece, like wallpaper, peeling. She remembered her name. Then she remembered that names were only for others to speak. She remembered her face. Then she remembered that faces could be borrowed. She remembered her voice. Then she opened her mouth and found another one waiting. It slipped out like smoke, familiar, but not hers anymore. The attic whispered through her lips. She's ready. The room was unchanged, or perfectly changed. No rocking chair. No drawings, no window. Just soft walls and a deeper dark. The kind of darkness that breathes back when you breathe into it. She heard the sound of laughter, her own, but split, half with joy, half with grief. Then footsteps, running. A child's rhythm, light and fast. It circled her unseen. "I was you first," the voice said. "You just came back to finish it." She turned, slowly, not with fear, with acceptance. In the center of the attic now stood a door, small, wooden, old. Carved into its surface was a symbol, a spiral surrounded by tiny handprints. She reached out. Her fingers trembled, not from doubt, but familiarity. She had touched this before. As a child, she opened it and stepped through. On the other side was a mirror, just a mirror, framed in iron, bolted to the floor. But it did not show her reflection. It showed the house, not how it was, but how it had been. Different wallpaper, old furniture, gaslight glow. Her grandmother, younger, moving through rooms with slow deliberation. Her mother as a child sitting silent at the piano. And her Miriam, 10 years old, standing in the hallway beneath the attic, mouth slightly open, listening, waiting. The older Miriam watched herself for a long time. Then the child looked up, right at her, eyes wide, mouth moving. She couldn't hear the words, but she didn't have to. She remembered. The child had whispered, "Come find me." And now she had. From the far corner of the mirror, something moved, not a reflection, something within the mirror. It crawled forward, slowly, dragging itself along glass that no longer felt like glass. It was not a creature, not a ghost. It was a memory given shape, stitched from old breath, unfinished thoughts, and the places she had left unguarded. It looked at her with eyes that belonged to no one, but it wore her smile. And when it reached the edge of the mirror, it whispered, "You forgot the part where you stayed." Then it stood and stepped through. They merged without resistance. Two versions of her, two timelines, two ends of the same unraveling. Miriam felt the other slide into place like a hand into a glove. Not possession, reunion. She opened her mouth, and both voices spoke at once. Now the house remembers. The attic door returned. It led back down. She walked it slowly, reverently, bare feet silent on the wood. As she descended, the house shifted. The walls breathed more freely. The shadows no longer flickered. They flowed, like ink in water. In the kitchen, the faucet turned on gently. In the parlor, the fireplace lit itself. On the hallway table, the photo of Clara and young Miriam rewrote itself. Now it showed 3 Miriams. One a child, one a woman, one faceless, but smiling. She walked to the window and looked outside. The woods were gone. Only fog now, endless and slow-moving. The mailbox out front read, M. Marin, She had not remembered changing it, but it felt correct. This had always been her home, hadn't it? Later that night, the house spoke again, not with whispers, but with silence. True silence, the kind that only comes when no one else is left inside. She stood in the hallway and stared at her reflection in the dusty glass. It moved with her, perfectly. Then, she spoke, and the voice was hers again. Almost. It said, "I remember everything now." Then came the sound of the front gate opening, a car door, footsteps on gravel. Miriam turned toward the door, calm. The house was already preparing. The lights adjusted. The floor creaked, warmly, welcoming. She moved toward the foyer and stood in front of the mirror, and for the first time her reflection smiled without hesitation. A soft, inviting smile, as though to say, "I've been waiting for you." The listing appeared without fanfare. Victorian home on Larkspur Lane. 4-bed, 3-bath attic space with potential. No mention of inheritance. No mention of Miriam Marin. The photos were oddly cold. Wide, clean shots taken in perfect light. The rooms appeared well kept. The curtains gently drawn open, not a speck of dust in sight. The attic window was shown only once, and from a distance. A round, glassy eye above the gable, shut, unblinking. The agent handling the sale never met Miriam, said the keys had already been dropped off in a plain envelope. No note, just a return address scratched into the flap. The handwriting looked borrowed. The couple who came to view the house 3 weeks later were young, newly married. Writers. She wanted space for an art studio. He wanted quiet inspiration. They joked about the house being too big, too isolated, too charming in a vaguely haunted way. The kind of place where you'd expect the floorboards to whisper when you're alone. They laughed. She stood in the parlor and said the light felt peaceful. He stood in the upstairs hallway and said, "It smells like lavender, just like my grandmother's house." Neither of them saw the shape behind the curtain in the guest room. The figure with its back turned. The one that dissolved when the light shifted. They almost didn't buy it. The woman had reservations. She said she felt like she was being remembered by the house. She said the attic window gave her chills. "It's like it's watching," she whispered to her husband that night. He smiled. "Then maybe it likes us." They moved in before the first frost, brought crates of books and mismatched furniture. Paper lanterns, plants, filled the rooms with music and chatter. For a time, the house was just that. A house, wood and wall, roof and nails. But in the stillness between songs, the woman often paused and tilted her head, listening. Once, while unpacking, "Old frames," she thought she heard her name whispered from upstairs. Only once, only faint. She called up to her husband. He said nothing. Later, he asked why she had called his name. One morning, she found a shoebox tucked into the back of the upstairs closet. She assumed it had been left behind. Inside were photographs, black and white, unlabeled. A girl standing in a window. The attic window. Her head was slightly tilted, her eyes wide. The woman showed the photos to her husband. He frowned. "That looks like you," she laughed. "Don't say that." But that night she stood in front of the hallway mirror for a long time and didn't smile. A week passed. The woman began painting again. At first, abstract shapes. Then, suddenly, faces. Each canvas bore the same elements: a woman sitting in a rocking chair, a child outside a window, a spiral door surrounded by handprints. She didn't remember finishing the paintings. Sometimes she found them already dry, already signed. Each one was marked with a name she didn't recognize. M. Marin, her husband, asked who that was. She said she didn't know, but the name tasted familiar. Then came the sound. Soft at first, barely there. Knocking. 3 slow knocks from the floor above. They didn't have an attic ladder, but the sound came anyway. The woman didn't tell her husband at first. She didn't want to seem dramatic, but each night, the knocking came. And after the 3rd night, she found the mirror uncovered. She was sure she'd covered it. But there it was, and in the reflection, the hallway behind her seemed longer than it should be. She turned around. It was normal again, but when she looked back at the mirror, her reflection was still looking over its shoulder. The husband found the music box under the guest room bed. It didn't look like anything they owned. He wound it once. 5 notes played. The tune sounded familiar, but neither could place it in the yum. Next morning, the music box was gone. The bed smelled faintly of lavender. They began hearing whispers, not voices, just breathy syllables, too soft to parse, always from behind, always just outside their field of view. Once the woman heard her husband whisper her name while she painted. She turned. He was asleep on the couch. She went to him, shook his shoulder. "Were you just in the studio?" He blinked up at her, confused. "No." "Why?" She looked back toward the hallway. The door to the attic, previously painted shut, was now ajar. Only an inch. Just enough to invite thought. The woman started dreaming in a language she didn't know. But when she woke, she understood it. Her journal, filled with symbols, spirals, loops, words in charcoal. One phrase appeared repeatedly. She stayed to remember. I stayed to forget. She didn't remember writing it, but her hand ached like she had. Then came the day her husband found her standing in front of the attic. The door wide open, the ladder fully extended. "Mia?" he asked. She didn't turn. She didn't blink. She whispered, "Did you hear it?" "Hear what?" "The voice." It said, "Closer." He climbed up slowly. She didn't follow. When he reached the top, the attic was empty. No light, no window, just darkness. And when he turned back, she was gone. They found her 2 hours later, downstairs, sitting in the parlor, hands folded in her lap, eyes blank. She looked up slowly when he entered the room, smiled, but not like she used to, like someone remembering a face they hadn't worn in years. "Who are you?" he whispered. Her smile widened. "I live here." He backed away, but she didn't follow. She just stared at the fireplace, as if something behind the flames was whispering to her, or through her. The next morning, she didn't remember any of it. She said she must have sleepwalked, said he must have dreamed it. He believed her, mostly. But that night, he slept with the hallway light on, and the attic door, again, was open. In the listing photos, the attic window was shut. But anyone driving down Larkspur Lane today would see it differently. That round, lidded eye always seems to be slightly open, a sliver of glass, a shape behind it. Sometimes it's a woman, other times, a child. Occasionally, a reflection. Mouth slightly open, head tilted, listening. Those who visited say the house feels too still, like it's holding something back. Some say they feel watched from the mirrors. Others say they hear breathing behind the walls. But they all say the same thing when they leave, that they can't quite remember what the attic looked like, or if it was ever really there, only that something above the ceiling felt warm, too warm, as though the house were alive and waiting. Can you feel it now? That quiet breath on the back of your neck, asking to be remembered? Tell us below. What do you think still lingers in the attic? Long before it had a number or a name, the house on Larkspur Lane had a memory. It did not begin with Clara Marin or with Miriam. It began before walls, before plaster, before the attic window was ever cut into the gable like an open wound. It began with listening, because the land beneath the house had always heard things. Not in the way of superstition, but in the quiet, deeper sense, a listening that turns long enough into invitation. Before the Marin family settled, before deeds and foundations, the townsfolk whispered about that stretch of wooded hill. They said animals avoided it, that snow refused to settle evenly across it, that the wind passed through the trees there with a sound too close to breath. In 1842, A girl named Althea Bauer was found wandering that land barefoot and smiling, her mouth full of dirt, her journal filled with words she had never been taught. She lived only 6 more days. The coroner said she had drowned from the inside out. There was no water in her lungs, only fog. The house was built in 1861, commissioned by the Hollingsworth family. The father, Edgar, was a preacher with interests in what he called structural sanctity, the belief that a house could be holy by geometry alone. He designed the attic first, a circle at the top, a mouth to the sky. The rest of the home spiraled downward from it, carefully measured, laid with proportions borrowed from obscure religious texts and misremembered dreams. Edgar's journals reveal a disturbing evolution. His sermons stopped referencing God. He began preaching about echoes, about memory as flesh. He died in that attic, quietly, sitting up. His wife sealed it shut, but the door reopened over and over again, each time wider. By 1910, 3 families had passed through the house. Each stayed no longer than 6 years. Each recorded the same things. Objects appearing where they didn't belong, dreams of children singing, a circular stain that bled through the attic floorboards, no matter how many times it was scrubbed. A local historian once referred to it as residual haunting, but others had a different name. In a letter dated 1914, a woman named Gertrude Kinney described it plainly. It does not haunt, it holds. Clara Marin was born in the house, the last in a long, fraying line. She was 5 when her brother vanished. The story told in town was that he ran into the woods chasing a red kite and was never seen again. But in her final years, Clara told a different version. She said the attic had grown tired of waiting, that the voice inside it had learned to speak like her brother, that it called her name through the mirror, that she did not answer, but he did, and he never came back down. By the time Miriam arrived, sent for a summer her mother wanted to forget, the house had already grown fluent in the family's grief. It knew the timbre of silence, the particular way Marin women paused before speaking. It knew how to stretch dreams just long enough to make them feel realer than memory. The attic door never opened for Miriam that summer, not in the way doors usually open. But each night she dreamed of climbing stairs that had no end, of reaching a window that watched her from both sides. And when she woke, the air smelled like someone else's breath. The town forgot the house after a while. That's what small towns do. They smooth over discomfort with stories that make things simple. They said Clara died alone, old and mad. They said Miriam must have wandered off again. Her car was still in the drive, her suitcase still upstairs, but no one had seen her in months. The door was unlocked, the attic sealed. The new real estate agent described it as charmingly peculiar. Her assistant said the place felt unfinished, but not in structure, in intention, as if something was still waiting to be concluded. Those who live in the house today do not stay long. It's never a dramatic exit. They just begin forgetting things. A painting they didn't hang, a note they didn't write, a feeling that someone familiar is in the next room, though they live alone. Some start to whisper to themselves. Others stop whispering altogether. A few begin writing again. They always use the same initials. M. Marin, one woman, claimed she saw herself in the attic window before she ever moved in. Another said the house told her secrets about her childhood that no one should have known. One man claimed the attic showed him the face of a daughter he'd never had, but who spoke to him in dreams and begged him not to leave her behind. They said the walls sometimes listen too closely, that they can hear your thoughts if you sit too long in silence. That when you speak your own name in the mirror, the echo responds slightly off. Records show the attic has been renovated 6 times. Each effort fails. Contractors complain of structural shifts that don't match the plans, measurements that warp between morning and night, a ladder that folds and unfolds itself in silence. One carpenter said the wood was soft where it should be hard, like skin under floorboards. He never returned. It said the attic is no longer just at the top, that it lives in reflections, in forgotten closets, in dreams of staircases leading nowhere, that once you hear your own voice from behind a door that shouldn't be there, you've already started becoming part of it. The house remembers every name, every face, every silence. It holds on to what was said, and especially what wasn't. It's not haunted in the traditional sense. There are no chains, no screaming specters, just remnants, half-thoughts, unfinished selves. Miriam did not vanish. She was remembered too well, and when a memory lasts too long in one place and it begins to grow roots. Now when the fog curls around the edges of Larkspur Lane and the attic window opens just a fraction, listen closely. If you hear your name in the hush, don't answer, not even in thought. Because once you're remembered by the house, it's already begun learning how to be you. If the house remembered you, what part would it keep? A voice? A silence? A forgotten dream? Let us know in the comments, before you forget yourself. They say Silver Lake never ripples, even in a storm, that it drinks sound and gives back silence. Claire didn't believe such things. Not until the knocking began beneath her cabin at midnight. Not until the whispering started in the reeds, calling her by name. The townsfolk said not to feed it attention. But some things once heard can't be unheard. Now she stares into the lake's glassy eye, and something ancient stares back. She came seeking peace. What she found was a truth too deep to resurface. Before we plunge any deeper, do you believe in the unseen forces lurking just out of sight? Comment below. Claire Elridge was not a woman who believed in hauntings. Her world, until recently, was one of noise, coffee-stained edits, and the tinny ring of a cell phone in perpetual demand. She had built her name as a fiction columnist in Boston, known for sharp wit and a cynical sense of realism. But grief has a way of dulling even the sharpest edge. After her sister drowned in a lake when they were children, a wound remained stitched too tightly beneath her memory. It was only after her father died in March that those stitches gave out. She needed quiet. Not the kind found in city bookstores or writers' retreats with curated silence, but a deeper, older kind. The silence of things left alone. That's how she found Silver Hollow, a village barely clinging to the New Hampshire maps, like a whispered memory someone tried to forget. And in that village, at its very edge, was a lake they simply called Silver. There was something peculiar about how it shimmered in the listings she found online. Always too still. Its glassy surface bore no blemish of wind or wildlife, just an infinite patience. The Larkin cabin, perched right at the lake's edge, was advertised with tired enthusiasm. Cozy, private, with its own dock and fireplace. Built in 1893, a perfect writer's retreat. It had been posted for 3 years without a single rental. Claire signed the lease within an hour. The drive north took 6 hours. With each mile, cell phone bars blinked out like dying stars. Roads narrowed, towns thinned. The final leg twisted through thickets of pine where the trees leaned in as though whispering to each other behind her back. When Claire reached Silver Hollow, it wasn't so much an arrival as a surrender. The village unfolded itself reluctantly. A gas station with no signage, a diner called Ellen's Table, and a church that hadn't chimed in years. No one greeted her, not at first. She stopped at the general store for groceries. The woman behind the counter wore a cardigan despite the heat and rang up her items without a word. When Claire mentioned the Larkin cabin, the woman paused mid-scan. "You're renting it?" she asked without inflection. "Yes," Claire replied. "For a month. Just looking for a quiet place to write." The woman's lips barely moved. Claire tried to lighten the mood. "It's beautiful online, looks like a postcard." The woman's fingers drummed once on the counter. "You stay indoors after dark." It wasn't advice, it was instruction. Claire blinked. "Is that local wildlife warning or—" But the woman only handed her the receipt and said nothing more. The road to the cabin was dirt,